Welcome to a fireside reading of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, Chapter 49, Part 2. We walked on, arm in arm again, found the coach in the act of starting, and arrived at Highgate without encountering any difficulties by the way. I was very uneasy and very uncertain in my mind what to say or do for the best. So was Traddles, evidently. Mr. Micawber was, for the most part, plunged into deep gloom. He occasionally made an attempt to smarten himself and hum the fag end of a tune, but his relapses into profound melancholy were only made the more impressive by the mockery of a hat exceedingly on one side, and a shirt collar pulled up to his eyes. We went to my aunt's house rather than to mine because of Dora's not being very well. My aunt presented herself on being sent for and welcomed Mr. Micawber with gracious cordiality. Mr. Micawber kissed her hand, retired to the window, and pulling out his pocket handkerchief, had a mental wrestle with himself. Mr. Dick was at home. He was by nature so exceedingly compassionate of anyone who seemed to be ill at ease, and was so quick to find any such person out, that he shook hands with Mr. Micawber at least half a dozen times in 5 minutes. To Mr. Micawber in his trouble, this warmth on the part of a stranger was so extremely touching that he could only say, on the occasion of each successive shake, "My dear sir, you overpower me," which gratified Mr. Dick so much that he went at it again with greater vigor than before. "The friendliness of this gentleman," said Mr. Micawber to my aunt, "if you will allow me, ma'am, to cull a figure of speech from the vocabulary of our coarser national sports, floors me. To a man who is struggling with a complicated burden of perplexity and disquiet, such a reception is trying, I assure you." "My friend Mr. Dick," replied my aunt proudly, "is not a common man." "That I am convinced of," said Mr. Micawber. "My dear sir," for Dick was shaking hands with him again, "I am deeply sensible of your cordiality." "How do you find yourself?" said Mr. Dick with an anxious look. "Indifferent, my dear sir," returned Mr. Micawber, sighing. "You must keep up your spirits," said Mr. Dick, "and make yourself as comfortable as possible." Mr. Micawber was quite overcome by these friendly words, and by finding Mr. Dick's hand again within his own. It has been my lot," he observed, "to meet, in the diversified panorama of human existence, with an occasional oasis, but never with one so green, so gushing as the present." At another time I should have been amused by this, but I felt that we were all constrained and uneasy, and I watched Mr. Micawber so anxiously in his vacillations between an evident disposition to reveal something and a counter-disposition to reveal nothing, that I was in a perfect fever. Traddles, sitting on the edge of his chair with his eyes wide open and his hair more emphatically erect than ever, stared by turns at the ground and at Mr. Micawber without so much as attempting to put in a word. My aunt, though I saw that her shrewdest observation was concentrated on her new guest, had more useful possession of her wits than either of us, for she held him in conversation, and made it necessary for him to talk, whether he liked it or not. "You are a very old friend of my nephew's, Mr. Micawber," said my aunt. "I wish I had had the pleasure of seeing you before." "Madam," returned Mr. Micawber, "I wish I had had the honour of knowing you at an earlier period. I was not always the wreck you hold before you." "I hope Mrs. Micawber and your family are well, sir," said my aunt. Mr. Micawber inclined his head. "They are as well, madam," he desperately observed after a pause, "as aliens and outcasts can ever hope to be." "Lord bless you, sir," exclaimed my aunt in her abrupt way. "What are you talking about?" "The subsistence of my family, ma'am," returned Mr. Micawber, "trembles in the balance. My employer—" Here Mr. Micawber provokingly left off and began to peel the lemons that had been, under my directions, set before him, together with all the other appliances he used in making punch. "Your employer, you know?" said Mr. Dick, jogging his arm as a gentle reminder. "My good sir," returned Mr. Micawber, "you recall me. I am obliged to you." They shook hands again. "My employer, ma'am, Mr. Heap, once did me the favour to observe to me that if I were not in the receipt of the stipendiary emoluments appertaining to my engagement with him, I should probably be a mountebank about the country, swallowing a sword blade and eating the devouring element. For anything that I can perceive to the contrary, it is still probable that my children may be reduced to seek a livelihood by personal contortion, while Mrs. Micawber abets their unnatural feats by playing the barrel organ." Mr. Micawber, with a random but expressive flourish of his knife, signified that these performances might be expected to take place after he was no more, then resumed his peeling with a desperate air. My aunt leaned her elbow on the little round table that she usually kept beside her and eyed him attentively. Notwithstanding the aversion with which I regarded the idea of entrapping him into any disclosure he was not prepared to make voluntarily, I should have taken him up at this point, but for the strange proceedings in which I saw him engaged, whereof his putting the lemon peel into the kettle, the sugar into the snuffer tray, the spirit into the empty jug, and confidently attempting to pour boiling water out of a candlestick, were among the most remarkable. I saw that a crisis was at hand, and it came. He clattered all his means and implements together, rose from his chair, pulled out his pocket-handkerchief, and burst into tears. "My dear Copperfield," said Mr. Micawber behind his handkerchief, "this is an occupation of all others requiring an untroubled mind and self-respect. I cannot perform it. It is out of the question." "Mr. Micawber," said I, "what is the matter? Pray speak out. You are among friends." "Among friends, sir," repeated Mr. Micawber, and all he had reserved came breaking out of him. "Good heavens, it is principally because I am among friends that my state of mind is what it is. What is the matter, gentlemen? What is not the matter? Villainy is the matter, baseness is the matter, deception, fraud, conspiracy are the matter, and the name of the whole atrocious mass is Heap." My aunt clapped her hands, and we all started up as if we were possessed. "The struggle is over," said Mr. Micawber, violently gesticulating with his pocket-handkerchief and fairly striking out from time to time with both arms as if he was swimming under superhuman difficulties. "I will lead this life no longer. I am a wretched being, cut off from everything that makes life tolerable. I have been under a taboo in that infernal scoundrel's service. Give me back my wife. Give me back my family. Substitute Micawber for the petty wretch who walks about in the boots at present on my feet, and call upon me to swallow a sword tomorrow, and I'll do it with an appetite." I never saw a man so hot in my life. I tried to calm him that we might come to something rational, but he got hotter and hotter, and wouldn't hear a word. "I'll put my hand in no man's hand," said Mr. Micawber, gasping, puffing, and sobbing to that degree that he was like a man fighting with cold water, "until I have blown to fragments the detestable serpent heap. I'll partake of no one's hospitality until I have moved Mount Vesuvius to eruption on the abandoned rascal heap. Refreshment underneath this roof, particularly punch, would choke me, unless I had previously choked the eyes out of the head of interminable cheat and liar heap. I'll know nobody, and say nothing, and live nowhere until I have crushed to undiscoverable atoms the transcendent and immortal hypocrite and perjurer heap." I really had some fear that Mr. Micawber might die on the spot, the manner in which he struggled with those inarticulate sentences, and whenever he found himself getting near the name of heap, fought his way onto it, dashed at it in a fainting state, and brought it out with a vehemence little less than marvelous, was frightful. But now, when he sank into a chair, steaming, and looked at us with every possible colour in his face that had no business there, and an endless procession of lumps following one another in hot haste upon his throat, whence they seemed to shoot into his forehead, he had the appearance of being in the last extremity. I would have gone to his assistance, but he waved me off and wouldn't hear a word. "No, Copperfield, no communication until Miss Wickfield, a redress from wrongs inflicted by consummate scoundrel heap." I am quite convinced he could not have uttered 3 words but for the amazing energy with which this word inspired him when he felt it coming. "Inviolable secret from the whole world, no exceptions, this day week. By breakfast time, everybody present, including Aunt, and extremely friendly gentlemen, to be at the hotel at Canterbury, where Mrs. Micawber and myself, Auld Lang Syne in chorus, and will expose intolerable ruffian heap. No more to say or listen to persuasion. Go immediately, not capable of bare society, upon the track of devoted and doomed traitor heap." With this last repetition of the magic word that had kept him going at all, and in which he surpassed all his previous efforts, Mr. Micawber rushed out of the house, leaving us in a state of excitement, hope, and wonder that reduced us to a condition little better than his own. But even then his passion for writing letters was too strong to be resisted, for while we were yet in the height of our excitement, hope, and wonder, the following pastoral note was brought to me from a neighbouring tavern at which he had called to write it. "Most secret and confidential. My dear sir, I beg to be allowed to convey through you my apologies to your excellent aunt for my late excitement. An explosion of a smouldering volcano long suppressed was the result of an internal contest more easily conceived than described. I trust I rendered tolerably intelligible my appointment for the morning of this day week at the House of Public Entertainment at Canterbury, where Mrs. Micawber and myself had once the honor of uniting our voices to yours in the well-known strain of the immortal exciseman nurtured beyond the Tweed. The duty done and act of reparation performed, which can alone enable me to contemplate my fellow mortal, I shall be known no more. I shall simply require to be deposited in that place of universal resort, where each in his narrow cell forever laid the rude forefathers of the hamlet sleep, with the plain inscription, Wilkins Micawber. Thanks so much for joining me. That was a lot of fun. What a great character. What a wonderful book this is. I hope you're all still enjoying it as much as I am. More tomorrow at the same time and place, 5 Pacific at Fireside Reading on Instagram. All the chapters uploaded to the YouTube channel, Fireside Reading. Till I see you then, please stay very well. Good night.